Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a mind-bending future where humanity doesn't just discover life on Earth anymore. We actively author it. Once you start looking through this lens, literally every forest, farm, hospital, and government policy starts to look completely different. So get ready to have your perspective entirely shifted as we explore what happens when we go from being inhabitants of the planet to the architects of life.
Think about the future for just a second. If I asked you where the next great revolution in human history is going to come from, what immediately pops into your head? Are we talking about a rocket taking us further out into space? Or, maybe you're thinking it'll be a machine, some kind of groundbreaking mechanical invention. Or maybe an all-powerful digital app that totally changes our daily reality. Well, no. What if the thing that changes the future forever is actually a living, breathing creature that has never existed before? Today, we are exploring a scenario where genetic engineering crosses a massive, unprecedented line. We aren't just talking about modifying animals we already have or tweaking crop yields. Actually, scratch that. We're talking about creating entirely new, never-before-seen species right in a lab. We're talking about totally new forms of life with their own biology, their own unique abilities, and their own place in the world. Section 1. The next great revolution. Let's look at the very first phase of this ripple effect. When these impossible breakthroughs first happen, honestly, the world probably wouldn't even know how to react. People would hear the phrase new species and just assume it's science fiction, right? Or some overhyped lab experiment. But then, the headlines would hit. Imagine turning on the news and seeing a creature designed specifically to survive severe drought better than anything else in nature. Or a plant engineered to literally eat pollution out of the soil while feeding communities where traditional crops just can't grow anymore. You might read about tiny, glow-in-the-dark bugs designed specifically to track environmental changes, or even totally new types of trees that grow incredibly fast and just suck massive amounts of carbon out of the air. Suddenly, this isn't a sci-fi movie anymore. The question stops being, can we create new species, and becomes how many, how fast, and at what cost? Okay, let's really dive into this, because the distinction here is absolutely crucial. For centuries, humanity has shaped animals and plants through breeding, but this is direct design. A new species wouldn't just be a slightly different variation of an old one, it would be a living answer to a specific human intention. This is the exact moment where understanding life turns into authoring it. Imagine a biological organism built specifically to detect toxins or to rebuild soil after a massive flood. That is a staggering leap in what science can do. Section 2, ecosystems, miracles and mistakes. Of course, a scientific miracle can get really complicated really fast. As we look at the environmental shockwaves, we have to remember one fundamental truth. Nature is not a simple machine with an off switch. It's a deeply complex web. So we're looking at a double-edged sword here. On one side, you've got the hopeful version, this utopian dream where bespoke biological helpers step in as our allies. We're talking custom-made pollinators stepping in for collapsing bee populations, or fire-resistant trees planted to cool down urban heat islands. But right next to that dream is a terrifying reality. Because when you pull a single strand in the web of nature, the whole thing shifts. A brand new species could unpredictably mutate. It could completely outcompete native life, and it could trigger a total invasive ecosystem collapse. And the trajectory of how that danger plays out is chilling. Step 1. The species is created in a perfectly confined lab. But step 2, an unpredictable escape happens. Because, life finds a way. Step 3, it drifts into entirely new climate zones. And finally, step 4, unstoppable adaptation. You see, unlike a broken machine, a living being doesn't just stop working when our original plan fails. It survives. It adapts. You literally cannot just unplug biology. Section 3, the ethical nightmare. This brings us to a much heavier, much more profound part of our journey today. Because the gravity of the philosophical and moral fallout here, it's immense. If we are playing architects and creating entirely new species, what exactly is humanity's new role? Do we just own these creatures? Do we have the right to design life and then totally dictate where it's allowed to exist? Think about what this implies. Do we owe our creation's welfare, protection? If a lab-designed species can feel pain or communicate or form bonds, do we owe it a basic level of dignity? I think this quote hits the nail right on the head. This debate is going to fracture the world. On one side, you'll have people who firmly believe the whole point of science is to improve life, and if these synthetic species help heal a dying planet, then we absolutely must do it. On the other hand, you'll have folks who see this and say a sacred line has been completely trampled on. They'll argue that by trying to redesign the natural world instead of respecting it, humanity has totally detached itself from nature. And realistically, both sides are bringing extremely valid, hard-to-ignore arguments to the table here. Section 4. A new geopolitical frontier.
Now, stepping back from the moral philosophy for a second, let's look at the global stage, because the ability to write the code of life instantly translates into the ultimate form of power. Just look at how this plays out across major global sectors. In agriculture, you've got amazing climate-stabilizing crops, but the risk? Total monopoly by a few powerful nations over global food markets. In medicine, you might see biological factories pumping out complex cures, but access to that tech could create massive healthcare inequality. And defense? Well, this one is probably the scariest. You could have rescue organisms designed to detect toxins, sure, but you could just as easily spark a full-blown biological arms race disguised as progress. Any nation holding this technology gets unbelievable leverage. Biology literally becomes diplomacy. It becomes national security.
And because those geopolitical risks are so high, the concept of border control gets totally redefined. We're no longer just checking passports or cargo. Nations would be forced into this intense, immediate defensive posture. We're talking heavily upgraded quarantine systems, massively expanded wildlife monitoring just to sweep for unauthorized lab-grown organisms crossing borders. You'd see hyper-regulated research labs and intense, probably very messy debates over new international treaties. The whole world would wake up to the fact that biology is the new, highly volatile geopolitical frontier. Section 5, 50 years from now.
So, where is all of this taking us? Let's fast forward a bit. Let's imagine what an integrated, synthetic, biological world looks like after decades of this just being the new normal. The timeline is wild to think about. Year 1, that first synthetic species hits the news cycle. By year 10, we're right in the middle of a massive biotech economic boom, alongside, desperate attempts to actually regulate it globally. But jump to year 50, the very definition of a species has totally changed. Imagine entire cities relying on living, breathing, air-regulating systems that we designed. Farms and hospitals operating on these hybrid ecological networks. Life on Earth essentially becomes a permanent collaboration between evolutionary history and human intention. But here is the absolute most crucial takeaway. Creating these species will not be the hardest part of our future. Honestly, governing them ethically will be. The science is almost certainly going to outpace our readiness for the consequences. And to navigate that safely, the public has to be involved. This can't just be a conversation for experts locked in private boardrooms, or public trust is just going to evaporate. We are going to need unprecedented transparency, massive oversight, and a heavy, heavy dose of humility. We have to ensure we don't end up in a world where poorer communities are used as testing grounds while wealthier ones reap all the miracles. Which leaves us with the ultimate question, one that's probably going to stick with you long after this explainer is over. When future generations look back at a civilization that finally figured out how to write brand new chapters of life, they're going to have to ask, did humanity actually become wiser, or did we just get more powerful? Because power alone definitely doesn't guarantee a better future. It's not just about what we have the ability to control, it's about what we ultimately decide we should protect. I want you to think deeply about that, because our future isn't just something we're passively inheriting anymore. It's something we are going to compose. Thank you so much for joining me on this dive into our incredible and very uncertain future.